In this video, we will talk about how to manage users. Now, in the old days, the way we managed users and groups was by editing the password file, the group file, creating a directory in the home directory, setting the permissions, all those kinds of tasks, all those little things that have to happen for a user, we did by hand. Nowadays, there are utilities that help with that. Most notably, there are GUI utilities. If I go here on my menu and I look at administration, there's a users and groups tool. And it says to add and remove users and groups. That's obviously the easy way to do it, but that's a GUI utility. And this is not about GUI, this is about command line. So we're going to learn the command line way to do it. These three files, etc password, etc group, and etc shadow, all have to be modified in order to create a user. And you notice that the only person who's allowed to modify those is root. The other thing is we have to add something to the home directory, and the only person who's allowed to do things in the home directory is root. The end of all of that is we have to be root in order to add a user. And in fact, if we open that GUI utility, the first thing it's going to do is ask us for our password. Because behind the scenes, that GUI tool is actually running sudo. It's actually running sudo and elevating your privileges to root. And from the command line, we're also going to need to run sudo. The command to add a user on Debian systems, which includes Ubuntu and Linux Mint, there are actually two commands for adding users. One is called useradd and one is called add user. Nice and confusing. And they are different commands. They work differently and they behave differently, and we'll look at the two of those. On Red Hat-based systems, both commands exist, but they are synonyms for one another, so it's a little less confusing there. Let's take a look at the man page for useradd. And it says create a new user or update default new user information. And it also says under the description, it's a low-level utility for adding users. On Debian, administrators should usually use add user instead. We're going to do it both ways just to show the difference. And so we're going to start with useradd Larry. And I get this not terribly helpful error message. I get permission denied, cannot lock etc password. Try again later. Well, the solution is, and I should know, oh yeah, I need to do something with password, I need to be root. They said it was a low-level utility. It's not being super helpful here. We can do sudo, useradd Larry. I have recently done sudo, so it didn't ask me for my password. We have now created a user called Larry. He exists in the password file. There he is right at the bottom. He's got a user ID of 1002 and a group ID of 1002. If we cat etc group, we see that group 1002 is group Larry. Larry exists. If we look at /home, it said his home directory was /home/Larry, but that actually doesn't exist. Useradd did not create that directory for me. And the other thing useradd didn't do, you notice we didn't specify a password for him. If we look at the shadow file, I need to be sudo for that. If we look in there, he's there, but he doesn't have an encrypted password. The second field here, this big long thing, there on me, that's my encrypted password. Larry just has an exclamation point, which basically means he has no password. He cannot log in. It didn't completely do everything, and it didn't take care of all the details we wanted. Let's try the add user directory, and let's see how that command differs. We're going to add user mo. The first thing that happens is we get a much better error message here. We get, hey, you have to be root. So that's a much more helpful error message. Add user mo. And we see a few things happening. It tells us some things that it's doing. It tells us it created the user, that it's added a new group, and it's creating the home directory and putting files in it. etc is basically a skeleton, a default home directory for users. And it wants a password. So we'll put a password in there. We enter it twice. This is Mo. He's in room number 13. And we'll leave the other information blank. Is that correct? Yes. The add user command actually ends up running useradd and doing all those things. But it just is a little bit nicer front end to it. So now if we cat etc password, we see that Mo is there. He's a little better specified out than Larry was. He has his comment field filled out. He has a shell. That's the other thing with Larry. Larry didn't even have a shell defined. If we cat etc group, they look the same. Created a group for both of them. If we look at /home, we see that Mo actually did have a home directory created. And if we look at the permissions are right on Mo's home directory, etc. add user definitely seems to do more and do a better job. So we'll take that advice. We'll say, yes, we should be using add user. So we'll do sudo add user curly. Give him a password. He's curly. Leave his other information blank. And now we've created curly. So we have 3 users, Larry, Mo, and Curly. You can see where I'm going with this. If we look in the password file, there they are, Larry, Mo, and Curly. Larry has some problems, but he doesn't have any name info. He doesn't have a shell. If we look at the shadow file, we also have the problem that Larry's password isn't set. Mo's and Curly's are. If we go back to the man page for useradd, we see that with useradd, we could have specified some things. We could have specified a home directory. We could have specified create the home directory if it does not exist. We could have specified the password. We could have specified the shell. All these things we could have done. There is a command called usernod. Useradd adds a user account. Usernod can change an account. Basically, all the same options exist. And that -s for shell. So we could say sudo usermod -s/bin/bash Larry. Now Larry has a shell defined and various things. So any of those things in usermod we can do something with. And we could do the same thing with the comment field, etc. And there's a bunch of other things that we could do. We're not going to delve into those at the moment. Now you might guess, since there's a useradd and a usermod, there's got to be something to delete users, right? And if you were to guess, you might guess it had a name like userdel. And you would be exactly right. Sudo userdel Larry. Sudo userdel Mo. Sudo userdel Curly. Cat, etc password, and they're all gone. Userdel just gets rid of them. But if we look at /home, it doesn't actually delete their home directories. There might be something in that home directory that needs to be saved or archived some way, so by default, it does not remove the home directory. There's one more thing that we need to talk about. We're going to redo the useradd of Larry, and you recall that one of the things that didn't happen with Larry is that he doesn't have a password set. The command to change a password is called password, and regular users can use this. Use it with no arguments, and it changes your own password. It'll ask you for your old password, and then it'll ask you for a new password and ask you to repeat the new password to make sure it's got it right. But we're not going to do that. We're going to change another user's password. Now, root is the only one who can do that. Root can set another user's password. So if we say sudo password Larry, we are not asked for the old password, and we never will be. If you are root, it is assumed you can set a password. So this is actually how, if somebody forgets their password, you do this as root, you set a new password for them. There's no way to find out what their old password was. You just have to set a new password for them. We are going to set a password for Larry, do it twice. And now if we sudo cat etc shadow, we see Larry has a password